Hi guys, it's Leon from Essential Edit, and the following is not exactly a podcast, but is a private call-in that I did for a friend, Christa, who holds several workshops for photographers online throughout the year. In this episode, we talk about some of the following things: keeping things organized and efficient in Lightroom. Also talk about the biggest mistakes that I see people make in Photoshop. And I spill it all. I actually break down specifically my personal technique for keeping faces looking natural and beautiful in Photoshop. I want to say thank you to Christa for releasing this media so that I can use it on our own channels. Thank you, Christa. If you haven't checked out Christa's work, go see her at christamiola.com. Enjoy the episode.
Okay, so thank you, Leon. I would love for you to first introduce yourself. I know that you do many things, but you're the founder, and are you the main retoucher over at Essential Edit? Because I know we work directly with you, but how many, retouchers do you have? And tell me a little bit more about your company.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me today. So I got my start in Photoshop as a Photoshop geek many, many years ago in the late 90s. I was just kind of finishing out college, and I had always been a photographer, through high school and college days. And when Photoshop became readily available, I was captivated. And so I wanted to use Photoshop every chance I had. In fact, in college, we had all PCs. They were all Windows machines for word processing, writing papers, and things like that. But we had 3 or 4 Macs in the back of the lab, in the computer lab. And those were reserved for art students only. And you had to have a password to get onto the machine. Mm-hmm. And so I would always hit up my friends, my art major friends, and I'd say, hey, what's a password on the Mac so I can go play with Photoshop? And I'd just get the password from them, and I'd go goof around on Photoshop, when I probably should have been, studying things like finance and marketing.
No, you went where your passion was. That's so
Exactly.
Awesome. Yep.
So, fast forward many years later, I'm working at a camera store selling cameras right when digital cameras became all the rage. And
what year was that?
Oh man, we're talking early 2000s.
Right.
So probably 2001.
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
I was still working at a camera store, and everybody wanted to get their film scanned. So they were still dropping off film. We would scan it, put it on a disc.
Right.
And so that was kind of my job at the camera store. Sell cameras, and then in your slow time, we need you to scan these negs. And I was the most technical guy in the shop, and I was glad to take it on, and had lots of fun opportunity to open up Photoshop and, goof around with photos in there. Mm. So then I ended up taking the job as a full-time retoucher at a pro lab. And that was, for me, my dream job at the time. I just couldn't believe that somebody would pay me to play in Photoshop. And I ate up every Photoshop tutorial and book that I could find. I went to Photoshop Geek festivals, did Photoshop challenges online, all that stuff.
Wow.
And was just completely submerged in this whole idea of like being the best at Photoshop. And then I saw that a lot of these professional photographers would spend sometimes tens of thousands of dollars to convert all their gear to digital. So they're getting a workstation, they're getting all digital SLRs. And then they'd come into the pro lab and they'd say, hey, I shot all these raw files from my last wedding. What do I do with them? And the lab didn't want the raw files, so they would turn them away. They said, oh, just convert them to JPEG and we'll print them for you. Well, that went counter to everything that they were being taught about why you shoot in RAW and, the value of shooting in RAW and all the dynamic range that you get. And so I just had this idea. I said, maybe I can start a service that would serve photographers. They need help with RAW processing, and they don't really want to do it. They're not passionate about it, and they don't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. So let me see what I can do. So I reached out to a few photographers, and it just continued to snowball over the years. So this was probably 2004 when my first son was born. I was
That's just when I was getting started in my business. April 2004, I got my first digital camera, and I was in business.
Awesome. There was so much going on in photography at that time, and it was a really, really exciting time for professional photographers. I feel like, you know, with digital finally becoming accessible price-wise and also quality-wise. It was a really exciting time.
Yeah.
So I became less and less of a retoucher and less of a post-production artist over time, and became more and more focused on developing my teams. And so, you know, raising up great retouchers and raising up great editors.
Right.
And so over the years, I mean, it's fluctuated, you know, just depending on, you know, the seasons and, you know, which project I've been working on, but I've had teams of, you know, 15 editors and retouchers, and you know, it's been a real shift for me, because there have been some times when I look back and I go, wow, I haven't actually launched Photoshop to do a job in months, because my team does that.
Right.
And what I learned is that this was like a really, really important thing for me. When I started a legitimate editing business, it was really hard to let go, because I was that Photoshop guy. I was the guy that knew everything about Photoshop. So I'd see these jobs come through. You know, I'd see a job come through for, you know, big names like Christa or something. And I'd go,
That's hilarious.
And I'd go, I want to do that one. I have to do that one because it's a good client and I need to take care of this myself. But what I realized is that I was stopping progress. I was preventing growth in my business.
Yeah.
You know,
I think every business owner comes to a crossroads when they've started, you know, as the actual person doing the service. In order to grow, you become more of a business owner and leader of the team. So.
What I discovered that was really fun for me was that, you know, I looked around the room and I said, man, I have some eager people who really want to learn how to use Photoshop. And I was that guy one time. So they're here with the assumption that they're going to learn Photoshop. And these are people that I hired because they kind of had this geeky element to them. They wanted to know, like, what's the best? Is it levels or curves, you know? And so I looked around the room and I said, man, I'm robbing them of opportunity. They came here thinking that they're going to learn. And if I'm taking all the good jobs, I'm preventing them from getting better. So I said, okay, I have to start giving up these jobs to my editors. That's what they're here for. I'm here to develop the business. I'm here to make sure that my team is working well together, that they're producing top-notch work. And then I'm here to grow the business. I'm here to go find, you know, new clients that need help. So I would give these over to my editors, and I'd say, okay, big client, really important. We've got to take care of this one and make sure it's really tight. So do your very best work and show me, you know, let's review it before we send it out. And what I realized is that a lot of the times they'd be 85% there. You know, I have such a high standard for retouching that I think my 85% would still be over 100% for most of my clients, but it was really, really important to me that my clients still got top-level service.
Right.
And so I would work with my editors and go, okay, you're at about 85, 90%. Here's what can make this even better. And they loved it. It was really, really cool to see them go, okay, like, I'm going to take this, I'm going to do better. And, you know, every now and then they'd have one where they really bombed it and they just didn't have a clue.
Right.
And it was a great opportunity for me to sit down with them and go, okay, so check this out. Here's how I would do it. Here's the fastest way at it. Here's the best way. Here's the most accurate. You know, just,
right.
It gave me a lot more opportunities. If I'm, you know, intercepting jobs from them all day long, then it's really counterproductive. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yes, there is a learning curve when you become a business owner, for sure. But it seems like you guys have what you do down pat pretty much. It's been seamless working with you. And so we have a lot of newer photographers, excuse me, and I think most of the photographers in the workshop are doing their own post-production. So I thought you'd be perfect to answer some questions and give some tips and tricks. So first of all, I have a bunch of questions, but what are the questions you get most frequently from newer photographers who've never outsourced before? Do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of questions. I mean, most common question is probably, or I should say the most common questions are the most basic questions. Because most people become a photographer because it was a hobby and they used to just kind of shoot here and there, and then the photos would land on their computer. And at some point people started saying, you're really good at this. You should charge money to do this. And, you should be a photographer. And so all of a sudden they're thrown into this professional arena where they're expected to process their photos and, turn them around in a timely manner. And it's kind of scary for a lot of people because there's no photographer's kit that you get in the mail when you decide to become a photographer that says, okay, here is the best workflow.
Yes,
okay?
Exactly.
Here are best practices for, your contracts. There are a lot of people that are out there like yourself that are helping photographers learn this, and we need that. My job is when I have a new client who is pretty new at photography, I like to just talk to them about their goals. What is it ultimately that you want to have done?
Right.
And for them, usually they want to go shoot and they want to be hands off and they want to let somebody else take care of the processing because there's too many decisions for them to make. So
right.
it
does
really
take up a lot of time, especially in newer photographers who, are wanting to learn and spending time in Photoshop and Lightroom. And, some people really, really love it, as you did yourself. Yeah. And I actually really loved it when I first started. But then when the workload gets to be too much, it was not so enjoyable. Plus, it seemed a bit repetitive, the tasks I was performing. So eventually I was like, if I'm going to grow, I'm going to have to outsource something or take less clients or something. So that's when we switched to you. Plus, I was developing what I was calling Photoshop shoulder. So now I think newer people have the choice to either delve in and learn and geek out in Photoshop and Lightroom and learn all it can do, or, some of what it can do. And, or, just say, I don't want to be on the computer so much. I'd rather skip the learning curve and just invest in a relationship with a retoucher. Right. So both avenues are somewhere in the middle. It's just great that they have that choice and the service exists now. So what are the questions that you get?
Yeah, so like, for example, basic questions would be like, how do I organize my files in Lightroom? How do I make a new catalog for every job that I shoot?
Can we talk about that a little bit on catalogs?
Absolutely.
Tell me, because I'm embarrassed that I like to keep my catalog the same I used to do it for like a season, but now, it does slow it down. But I don't want to open a new catalog for every client. So I keep the same catalog for, too long, I think, now. So. Yeah, well, there are trade-offs to everything. Okay, there are trade-offs to everything in workflow and most things in life. And so, when you so we have these two ideas. One idea is I'm going to create a new catalog for every client. Yes. Whether you're a portrait client, wedding photographer, portrait photographer, boudoir photographer. So of all those flavors of photographers. We have to decide, what's going to work best for my workflow. Is it going to be single for each, or is it going to be one master catalog? And I would say this, just to be to the point. If you're going to use a service like ours, where you're going to send your work out to be edited for the baseline editing. Okay, so the baseline Lightroom work, which would be adjusting the exposure, the contrast, the white balance, making sure that everything is consistent from beginning to end. It's just kind of getting you to the baseline. We're not talking yet about the retouching, right?
Which is usually later on down the road. If you're going to use a service, it's by far the best idea to create one catalog for every job, for every client. And the reason is because it's just really easy to send and receive files. Super easy.
Sure.
So with Lightroom, starting with Lightroom 5, they created this feature called Smart Previews. And Smart Previews basically allow you to send your catalog and the mini versions of your raw files. So instead of sending,
That's
15
great.
gigs worth of data over the internet, which is going to take forever.
Yes.
You're sending just a few hundred megabytes.
That's
and it's
awesome.
enough. Yeah, it's enough information for us to edit full screen. And we can see all the detail. We apply those adjustments to your catalog, and then we send you a new catalog.
Right. That's
which
so
updates.
Cool.
Yeah. So if you're going to use the service for the baseline editing, definitely use single catalogs for each job.
And what if you're not going to do any outsourcing whatsoever?
I'm personally still a fan of the single catalogs just because it keeps things snappy within Lightroom.
Right.
Once you get above a certain number, I don't know what that number is, but once you get enough files in that catalog, things start to slow down a little bit, and it can be kind of a pain. I
think I'm at that number. So usually I would take it only to like 15,000, and now I'm like at 35,000. I'm like, right. I've got to do a new catalog. But I often dip back in so much to, because especially when teaching, social media, blogging, whatever you're doing, I just am constantly working on the different clients. So to be constantly shifting from catalogs, I don't know. But I think if you do seasonal or even like annual catalogs, depending on the volume that you shoot, it can be, I don't know, a time saver for me to have it all in one.
Yeah, well, here's a trade-off. Okay, when you use a master catalog, things are all in one place. You just open Lightroom and you can find your stuff. Yes. Okay, and what's cool about it is you can really leverage some of the great technology that's built into Lightroom. Take keywording, for example. So if you have 35,000 images in your catalog and you are diligent about every job applying keywords, so maybe you have a vendor, for you might have a makeup and hair artist that you've worked with on this particular job. So you tag them, you use a keyword on that job that says, Mia's hair or whatever, so that when you do a search in your Lightroom catalog, you can search for that keyword, Mia's hair, and find all of the images that your hair and makeup artists have done. So you could easily find those images and go, okay, I'm going to send these files over to her because she asked for a few for her website or something. Right. So that is a really powerful thing that I think, maybe 2% of photographers actually use. The keywording, the smart collections, creating automatic rules to find those files, even sorting for things like 5-star images, like if you use a star rating. I do, and then those smart collections are pretty awesome. So that's a trade-off. You lose that when you go to single catalogs, because you can't really search all of your files. You're kind of going, now I have to look through each catalog. That's a bummer. So, but you have to decide on what's best for your workflow. And there are other ways of finding all of your 5-star images and managing your workflow in a way that they're still easy to find. Trade-offs. You could end up with one master catalog where you can easily find everything and leverage the technology to, even facial recognition is great in Lightroom. So you could find all the photos of a particular person. Right. If you work with them on more than a few occasions. Right.
Okay. What? Let me ask you now. Let's shift. Well, let's stay with Lightroom first. What tips would you give for, let's say, making your editing more efficient? Number one tip. Just to be brash. Yes. care less.
okay?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Now, that sounds, I don't want to be careless or too brash in saying that, but I'll explain. But people need to care a little less, okay?
Yeah.
Because here's what I see. I see photographers spending sometimes 10 hours or more doing just baseline edits in Lightroom.
I know.
It's insane. So what happens is they're treating every single image as if that image is going on the cover of a magazine.
I know. It's interesting you mentioned that analogy because I have the same philosophy and I teach the same exact thing, and I say keep it into perspective. And when I show them that I edit in less than an hour, like from raw images to out to client, you know, and I breeze past things so fast and just go, that looks about right. And just keep moving. Because especially when you're working with, you know, real women every day, clients who are, you know, not, they're not competition judges or, you know, agents or, you know, you're not working for a magazine or going to put it on a billboard. You really can spend so much time. And I think there's a false, you know, sense of perfection. Like, I'm going to get it perfect. It's no, you're going to keep on working on that. And it never ends because we're creative individuals.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
I mean, I would love to do the math. I mean, I'm not a math guy, but I would love to maybe send the question out to a math person and say, here are all the sliders and the increments and all the options you have in Lightroom. How many choices are we given? Like, how many possible combinations? Probably infinite. So, you know, you can't look at Lightroom as, okay, now do I use this preset or that preset? Oh, maybe I want the film look on this one and I want a black and white version of it too. You know, you have to just look at it as, we need to get this to a clean, simple baseline so that we can present this to the client. Yes, if you want to pick your favorite 2 or 3, you know, like really like to do those those real money shots, do it. But you are a photographer, you're not a post-production artist. And I think it's important for people to realize that the time that they're editing is not usually time that they're paying themselves.
Right. But however, I just want to step in here real quick. I still, in under an hour, will do post-production work in Lightroom that creates, you know, a variety. So if I'm showing 30 to 50 images to a client, I do change about half of those to black and white. I do love using my presets to increase, like, let's say the different looks. I'll make one look very, let's say, vintage. Another look, I'll use something else. So it's consistent. Like, there's usually 3 to 5 looks in any session that I do, but I'll use one preset for each set. If I'm using presets, I don't use them all the time. Yeah. But even in that, I tweak maybe a couple things after I put that on there, like highlights or little decrease in saturation. And then I sync it up with all the others in that look. Yes. And I'm done. I'm not suffering over every single image. I do one in that look and then sync the rest.
Exactly my point. And that is exactly what I'm saying.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you.
I see too many people overthinking every single image. Like, if you're spending more than 10 seconds on an image for the baseline edit. Okay, so let me be clear with this too. I think that a good workflow is that you do work in batches when it comes to editing. So, like, if you're gonna do your baseline edit, let's get your clean baseline edit. And for me personally, when I actually shoot and when I do jobs, I like to get the clean baseline. And then once I've kind of already done my culling and then I'm doing my baseline, I'm kind of keeping in mind my money shots and my favorites. And then it's really, really easy for me, as I kind of like look back over everything, I can easily go boom, 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 laser focus. These are the money shots and these are the ones that I want to spend a few extra minutes on. But I work on just getting the baseline done first because for me personally, it's much more efficient and fast when I'm in that mindset of let me, establish good clean color, good clean exposures, good contrast, and then I can find my few. The thing that I think most people need to let themselves be okay with is that number one, you're never going to get it perfect. You could, just because the options are there doesn't mean you should use them.
Right,
So let's not over process this. Let's not overthink it.
Right.
But also it's one of those things that they have to realize that most people nowadays, it's true, digital photography is accessible to everyone with a smartphone. And that's awesome. It's great, And so in some ways, I think photographers feel like they have to do so much more to make it better because everyone's a photographer today. So I think that some people feel this heaviness of like, oh my gosh, like I really, really, really have to impress them, or really have to edit this in a way that is super unique that they can't do on their own. Well, if you're shooting with a digital SLR with a good lens and you've been at this, perfecting your craft for any amount of time, my guess is your results are much better than theirs would be with their iPhone or their Android. Okay, so like most people are used to just taking photos with their smartphone. We're talking about the common client. When you as a photographer step in and say, okay, you have them over to your studio, you kind of pamper them, you treat them well, their hair and makeup is done, your lighting is beautiful, and whatever the location is, you're going to wow them already. So let your photography speak for itself. Don't rely on the post-production to carry you as a business. I think it's a terrible strategy to say, well, I'm gonna be the photographer that's doing the new look, the new fad, the new style of processing, because in 2 or 3 years from now, that look is going to be outdated. And I think it's far better to think of a strategy of, in business, of wowing your client with your service and then wowing them with your photography skills and creating a timeless look that still stands and still impresses 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
I love that. I love that philosophy. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, well said. Okay. So did you want to say anything else about Lightroom in terms of efficiency or strategy? Okay, go ahead.
One more thing about Lightroom. I am still shocked at how many people never realize that Quick Develop is there. So Quick Develop is the module where you can kind of group your photos and say, okay, well, all of these need to be brighter. All of these need to be warmer. All of these need to be cooler. And with, a couple clicks of a button, you're there.
Yes.
What most people, I think, get scared with is they feel like, oh, if they use Quick Develop, it's cheap and it's not, refined processing or something like that.
Right.
But I think, when you're doing your own processing and you're kind of just getting started as a photographer, rely on the tools that you've got. Okay, Quick Develop is actually very amazing because you can take a look at your whole set of images and get yourself in the ballpark before you start doing the granular edits, the one-by-one edits.
Right.
So I would say don't be afraid to use Quick Develop. Now, one thing that people forget or don't realize about Quick Develop is that you can still use it even once you've done one-by-one edits. So let's say I have 3 images side by side and they all have different exposure settings. Okay, so one is 0.5, one is 1.5, and the other's under 1 or whatever. So if they all have different exposure settings, if you look at the actual slider in Lightroom and they all have different settings, if you go to Quick Develop and say, I want to make each of these brighter, it's just going to move them brighter relative to the settings where they were. So I think a lot of people think that Quick Develop is going to, erase the settings that they had, or
oh, really? Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting.
So when you click the plus for warm, it's going to look at whatever your white balance is, and it goes, okay, relative to wherever it is, we're going to go 1 click.
Sure. I just thought that was kind of intuitive. That's interesting that I didn't know people had that misconception of
yeah, and where it comes in for us is that let's say we edit a wedding for somebody, and maybe the reception has this really crazy canned uplighting kind of thing going on in the background, and it creates some weird
shadows.
Color casts.
Yeah.
Well, what happens is, sometimes people want to send a job back to us and they go, hey, the reception, the lighting looks really weird. I wonder if we could just cool that down or warm this up or whatever. And we're glad to do it. So any job that comes in, if you get it back and you go, not quite right, feel free. Send me some screenshots, send me an email, call me, whatever, and we'll figure out a way to make it better for you.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to point people to the Quick Develop because they go, okay, let's go to Quick Develop together real quick. And let's see if you can select those images. And now can we make them warmer? And is that to your liking? Because that's much quicker than having me put that back into production. Then you wait, another 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever.
Right.
Till the next, shift has a production run. And then, you download it and open it up. So Quick Develop works for us kind of on the back end as well.
Right.
Where when we send a job back, if they have a section that they want to overall make a little bit brighter or a little bit darker, they can do that on their own.
Well, I only use it when I'm in library and selecting images. And if an image is I want to just see brighter so I could compare it a little bit better. But I don't really use Quick Develop anymore because now my exposures are pretty spot on and I just choose my selects in library, move over to develop, and then I'm not tweaking anything all that much, but I could see where when you're doing, a wedding and your exposures are all over the map, I guess, that Quick Develop can be really useful. So that's a good tip.
And that actually is one of the biggest things that I try to hammer on with my clients is nailing your exposure.
Yeah, totally.
Shooting a manual, getting comfortable there, and being really proficient with your skills and your ability to analyze what's going on with the light and the exposure values.
Right.
It's really, really important.
Okay.
And too many people rely on aperture priority or shutter priority, and you're going to be limited in what you can do in those modes. And so I always tell people, my camera is it's always a manual. My camera is never in aperture priority.
Right, me too.
And I'm not saying I always shot in manual.
Right.
But there came a point when I said, I'm not getting the results that I want as a photographer. So
right. I shot in automatic for my first 3 years in business. I think it was 3 years, maybe 2 or 3 years. It was crazy, embarrassingly long. And I just was like, I'm happy. I don't, and then I talked to a photographer who was like, come on. And I was like, all right. So I taught myself manual in less than a day. I mean, all you have to do is, dive in and you'll figure it out.
Yes. And I think the reason why I want to mention that is because you'll get much better results in post-production.
Sure.
And it'll make your job so much easier in post-production.
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree. So, okay, can we move on to Photoshop? I want to talk about...
Let's do it.
I want to talk about... I have so many questions, but I want to know, what are the biggest mistakes you see? I thought that would be juicy because you must see it. You must see it all.
What the biggest mistake I see in Photoshop is plastic skin. I hate it.
I hate it too.
Oh my god.
What are people?
Can we stop making people look like mannequins?
Yeah.
Mannequins with weird blurred skin. I don't know what's going on.
I was just going to ask you, I'm like, is there some weird program out there? Are people overusing a program? What are people doing? I really don't know because I'm in a bubble a little bit, sort of. So I'm just curious. Yeah. I wish there was I don't know what people are doing and how they're doing it.
I think what a lot of people do is they open an image. Let's just talk about like a portrait, like a headshot. Okay, so
yeah,
I think what a lot of people do is they open it in Photoshop. Maybe they copy that layer, make a new layer, and they blur it. Maybe they use Gaussian blur or some other kind of, radial, or not a real, but they use some kind of blur that,
that's the worst way to do it. That's just the worst way to do it.
I agree. And then they just mask in the skin, and then they kind of drop the opacity a little bit, and it just has this weird look to it. It's totally unnatural.
Okay, so what's your best tip on how to avoid that and keep a natural look on the face when, especially boudoir, I think probably one of the things boudoir photographers retouch the most is wrinkles and lightening them and, skin blemishes. So what are your tips for that.
Yes, in Photoshop, I use 3 layers. Okay, so
Ooh,
when I
interesting.
open an image, I immediately hit Command J. Boom.
Same,
That
yeah.
copies my background layer to a new layer. So it's just an exact copy. That way I always
Have the
go
original.
back to the original
Right.
on the bottom layer if I need it.
Yeah.
But I do Command J. Boom. There's my remove layer. So I call this my remove. So I'm going to remove any blemishes that don't need to be there.
Right.
Now, what my standard is, anything that's permanent stays. So if you
Sure.
have a mole,
It stays, yes.
it stays.
Scar.
Like, I have moles on my face. It would look strange if they were gone.
They're
if I saw
adorable
it.
on you, I must say.
Thank you. So anything that, is like birthmark, mole, something like that stays. But if it's a blemish, if it's, just something that's not supposed to be there, it's gone.
Right.
So that's my remove layer. Okay. And that
Okay.
one stays at 100% opacity.
Okay.
So in other words, it's just kind of like a copy of the original, but now
Removed.
it's just a little bit better.
Right.
The next layer, so I hit Command J when I'm done removing. Okay. I hit Command J again.
On the removed layer.
Yes.
Okay,
so
got it.
So I'm copying my remove layer.
Yeah.
Now, this is my reduce layer. So the reduce layer is where I'm going to focus on things that I just need to
lighten.
Soften a little bit. Yeah, lighten a little bit. So like wrinkles or eye bags. Okay,
right.
So eye bags are one of the notorious things too. They're a notorious telltale sign. You can always spot when a photo's been over retouched by the eye bags.
Because the eye bags are removed and you don't see their eye anymore instead of like lightened. I know. I've got that. Yeah, pet peeve.
Exactly.
So yeah.
So this layer, what I do is, and now it's going to sound extreme at first, but what I actually do is I'll use the clone tool. I use the clone tool at about 30 to 50%, but I'll change the mode to lighten. So the blending mode of that tool is now at lighten, where that means that if I'm going to sample a brighter part of the cheek to kind of remove or reduce that those eye bags or wrinkles, I have a lot of strokes to do that with. When you have it at 100%, when you have your clone sample at 100%, sometimes it's just way too strong and way too obvious.
I usually suggest doing under eye around 20%. Other places on the face, 30, like forehead, it could be 30 to 40. But it's interesting because I keep it on, what's the default mode? Not lighten. It's just normal. It's called normal. So I use it at 20 on normal. But I imagine if I put it on lighten, then I could up it a little bit and maybe have the same sort of effect.
Yeah, no, that's one of the most powerful things in Lightroom is blending modes. So for those who aren't used to using the blending modes, when you change your clone stamp tool to lighten mode, what that means is it takes your sample point and then it analyzes where you're painting. And if you're painting on pixels that are darker than your sample point, then it lightens them. But if you're painting on pixels that are brighter than your sample point, it leaves them alone.
Yeah, I use it mostly for when I'm retouching roots. I use the darken. And so that's where I find myself using the blending modes the most. Anyhow.
So the glory of this technology era is that anyone can go to YouTube and watch a tutorial on using different blending modes. And I would encourage every one of your listeners to go just at least learn darken and lighten and play with those two blending modes. And they'll see their retouching have a much more refined look. So back to the stacks of layers that I've got. So I've got my original, I've got my remove, and my reduce layer. Now you might flip on this, but here's what I do on that reduce layer. I actually usually remove everything completely. So like if it's eye bags, just for example, I'll actually paint them so that they're gone. But then I drop that layer opacity down to about 30%. So it's way, way, way down, as if I painted it at 30%. I just like to do it.
I totally get you.
Yeah.
Then you have more finer control by reducing the opacity by tiny, tiny increments rather than feeling like you need to get the clone stamping absolutely perfect to that ratio. That's a really good idea. I really like that tip. I'm actually going to incorporate that.
Cool.
I like that.
And then once I've removed everything that, all the wrinkles and things that I need to remove there, then I'll reduce that layer opacity down to 30%. Things are looking good. I might play with that a little bit. Maybe it goes to 20%. Maybe it goes a little stronger, wherever it needs to be for that image.
Mm-hmm.
And then I Command J that layer. And now this is it's too technical to explain, but I use a custom created healing brush to smooth the skin. So what's important when you smooth skin is you have to keep the texture of the skin.
Right.
And people miss that. I mean, if you see somebody in a photo that has no pores, 0 pores, it's bad. You just can't do that. So you have to have texture. And I've created with the healing brush a custom setting and some custom. It's basically using a pattern and a blending mode. And it's something I wish I could just kind of show you real quick, but it's something that I developed after retouching thousands and thousands of images and taking different techniques from different books and tutorials and kind of just mixing up my own technique. Now, if you're so inclined, you could use a Photoshop plugin called Portraiture. That is actually one that I tried out for a while, and I was really pleased with it. It did a really good job of smoothing the skin, but still allowing for texture. And with a plugin like Portraiture, you can really dial that in. You have a lot of control. And so I would still use the same process even if I used Portraiture, where I did my several layers, my 3 layers. But for me, when I do the smooth layer, my final layer, the layer opacity is already down. Maybe it's down to anywhere between 30 and 50%. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of averaging out the tones of the skin with my tool, with my healing brush tool, and I'm still allowing the texture to be there. In fact, it adds back a little bit texture after smoothing. Hard to explain, but it's and I'm only painting on the areas that on the face that need to be smoothed out. Because think about it, we've removed anything that shouldn't be there.
Right, that's why I'm curious what you're actually doing that on. Because I actually don't do that. I just, again, only if it's requested of me, will remove blemishes and lighten a little wrinkles or bags. But
well, to be clear, I'm not a fan of actually smoothing every image.
Okay, good. All right.
I personally don't.
Gotcha.
So I don't usually smooth, but I found that in the business of retouching portraits, a lot of photographers really wanted more smooth skin, and sometimes you end up with
because their clients do.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah.
But the smoothing is really just, I'm being very deliberate in painting just on the skin and on the face. So it's not like I'm applying, to the whole layer and then blending it out and stuff. Because what happens is when you blur a whole layer, it messes with your edges. So like the edges of the face, now it's going to make the edge of the face and where the background meet blurred. It's not good. You don't want that.
Right.
So that's why I think it's very deliberate to use a tool like Portraiture where it detects edges. Use a filter of some sort that maintains your edges, and or using a custom paintbrush tool that allows you to paint in the smoothness and then drop the opacity of that layer so that it's super subtle.
Okay, well, cool. Okay, I have one other question before a big question. Do you use Liquify?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have any, do you see a biggest mistake, or do you have one big tip for Liquify? I do talk about Liquify a lot in my tutorials because it's a great tool.
Yeah. For me, Liquify works best when let's see if I get my terms right. I don't have it open in front of me, but I use the move. It's either move left or move right feature within Liquify, where it's just moving an edge. When you paint along that edge, it'll move it to the side. So I use that, but I reduce the power of that brush almost all the way to the bottom. So
yeah.
let me actually launch Photoshop right here and pull up an image.
Okay.
But I actually I'll use the strength, and I don't know if it's strength and flow. Let's get in there and take a look real quick. But you have to go really, really super slow with it and super subtle.
Yes.
Because
like sometimes just the tiniest 2% tweak is all you need.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Right. And okay, cool. So while you're doing that, I want to ask you, what changes to a picture if you only could choose a couple things to do? For boudoir specifically, what changes do you think has the most impact to the image? Like if you could only go in there, and I know everything's on a case-by-case basis, but what do you find are the biggest, impact changes?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm personally minimal when it comes to retouching. So when I look at an image, if you were to send me an image, for example, say from a boudoir session, and you said, Leon, can you make this image look better in whatever way you want to?
I would never do that, but okay.
Oh, I know. But I'm setting a precedent of, like, if you were to tell me, like, just do whatever.
That is my question. Sure.
I would work more on dodging and burning and working with the levels of light and the different zones of light than I would retouching the body.
Totally agree with you. Yeah. That's hilarious. Okay. So we're too similar. We're so similar. I'm trying to give people another perspective. But you and I are both minimalists, and we both would rather dodge and burn than actually, alter an image.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's really great to hear that you also agree that that's going to have a bigger impact than, I mean, if you were going to only choose one thing to do, that's what you would do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so back to Liquify.
Yeah. So in Liquify, when you open it up, one little tip with Liquify that I found is really useful is when you have a large image with a bunch of layers. Now, it should be said too, if you're going to liquefy, if you were going to use my method of the remove and reduce and smooth layers, you're going to need to start first with the liquefy. You'll need to copy your background layer and do the liquefy on that layer, because if you try to do it later, it gets a little too messy with 2 layers that already have dropped opacity, and it just gets too messy. So you're going to need to start with that as your baseline layer. Then, because if you drop the opacity of your layer with Liquify, it's just going to show the underlying layer that has... Oh, yeah,
that's not a possibility. Of course.
Yeah, so you have to keep this one at 100%. So when you go into Liquify, I like to if I'm just going to target one section, like maybe, let's say, the waistline.
Yes.
Okay. So if I'm going to target just the waistline, and that's the only thing that I'm going to liquefy, I'm going to use a marquee tool and just select that area of the image, and I'll copy that to a new layer, rather than copying the whole layer. Now, why, Leon?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that.
Because think about this. Every layer you make creates more space. It takes up more space on your hard drive.
Oh, gotcha.
RAM.
Okay.
So your performance takes a dive when you open a full layer in Liquify.
Okay.
So, everybody's got a nice fast iMac or MacBook Pro, and, it can usually handle this. But let's just be honest, if you've got to liquefy and retouch 10 images, and, it adds, 10 extra seconds to every image, it starts to add up over the course of doing,
Yeah,
10.
You've made a life out of this, so you've got all of the time savers. That's what I love to hear. So, okay, you take the marquee tool, select the area you're going to do, duplicate that.
Yeah, and then what I do is I'll just copy that to a new layer. Because if it's just a waistline or an arm or something, I'll just copy that to a new layer. So I just select it with a marquee tool, Command-J. Now it's on a new layer. Gotcha. Now when I open Liquify, it's just going to show me that little section. That's fine. Right. That's all I really need. Okay. And over on the left-hand side, there are your tools. So I'm going to use the push left tool. And it's towards 3/4 of the way towards the bottom of those tools on the left.
Right.
So when you use the push left tool, basically it just looks at your brush where you're painting and it pushes things left. So as you paint along an edge, it's just going to push that whole edge to the side. Now, I take the pressure, like currently I just opened it up and my pressure is at 10. So when you open it for the first time, it's probably at 100, which is just way too strong. I mean, if you paint with that, it's just going to look weird. It's going to look like you're in a funhouse mirror. So I dropped the pressure way, way down, to 10 or below. And then I take several passes on that edge. So if I'm working on an arm or a waistline or something, I'll go real soft and I'll just paint with real long, broad strokes because I want it to be subtle, and I don't want to just I don't want to push everything over, and then we've got this weird distorted edge.
Right.
So that's my tip with Liquify.
Okay.
Copy and use only the area you need, because then Liquify will load faster and it'll take up less, time to load and save and everything else that you got to do in Photoshop.
I love that. I just do the whole image, so I'm gonna try that and see, because it does take some time. So I love that tip. I love chatting with you. I always learn things. So that's all I've got for now. I might have more for you in the future.
Always glad to talk shop.
Well, thanks so much, Leon. I super appreciate it. You're going to help so many people. Before we get off the phone, though, I would love to just hear a little bit about how people can introduce themselves to your service and try you out for the first time. I know that you generously gave, we have giveaways from you, and also I think a discount for first-time users.
That's right.
So if people want to experiment with outsourcing either their baseline editing or their retouching in Photoshop, what are your recommendations on dipping their toe in that water?
I would have them just shoot me an email. It's just leon@essentialedit.com. And I think the fastest way to figure out what's best for any potential client of ours is that we just talk on the phone for a few minutes.
Great.
We can email, of course. I understand if email's just got to be it, then we can email.
You're so like me. I just get on. I'd like to get on the phone. You're a very personable person. So am I. So I like to just get on the phone. Plus, you can have a dialogue about what their needs are, what their goals are, as you mentioned earlier. And I love that about you. We can cover so much more ground in just a few minutes on the phone. Yes.
Than on email. If you're asking technical questions about Lightroom and Photoshop and how does the service work, it's going to take us probably a good week of back and forth just in the timing of our own schedules to sit down and write emails to each other. So honestly, phone calls are best for me because I feel like we can cover more ground, answer more questions, and you get a better picture. But I'll give you a quick snapshot of how it works. After we chat for a few minutes, I'll likely send the person to a link on our website where they can upload some sample images. Usually people will want to try out the service first, so they can try out our editing service, which is the baseline editing. And we'll do a dozen images in Lightroom for them for free, just so that they can check it out and see how that works. I'll walk them through how that process works. And we take feedback. And we create a personal profile for everybody. So if that person says, okay, those samples were great, but I just kind of like my stuff warmer. Okay, no problem. We'll do another round for you, get your feedback, and then once we've decided on that right level of warmth for you, we've captured that into a preferences file that travels with every order in the future. Now when it comes to retouching, it's a little harder to quote-unquote try out the service, but just because it's so time intensive, I can't really offer to retouch 10 images for free for everybody. But it's a process. Usually I'd say, okay, let's get in touch on your next job where you've got something you need to retouch. And let's just talk about it. I'll get you a really good, accurate quote, and we'll move forward on that. Everything is open for feedback. So if we do a first retouching order for one of your members, and they come back and they go, Leon, there was not enough retouching for me. No problem. I'll put it right back into production, get you new files, usually within 24 hours, and I'm taking notes again on your profile. So this client likes things a little stronger than our standard when it comes to retouching. Maybe they like more smooth skin, or maybe they like, more, body sculpting or something like that.
Sure.
That's fine. And
Yeah.
that goes into your personal profile.
That's-
It goes with every order in the future.
That's one thing I recommend, when you're just invest time in the relationship, it's going to take maybe a little time for you both to get to know each other.
Right.
So, and I really do love that you guarantee your work and you keep working, because sometimes, what my taste isn't my client's. So I give it a go and approval, and then I showed a client and she'd prefer a little more or a little less. Usually it's a little more. So yeah. And you include that in the price. It's not like you're keeping, charging.
Right.
So, and do you want to just briefly talk about, let's say if someone shows 30 images to client and they need 10, or let's say all of them are touched. She has bruises on her knees, and that's such an awful thing to say. Let's say she's, hates her wrinkles, or, wants her varicose veins, whatever it is, all that retouched on maybe 30 images, the same things. So what do you charge per image? I know you have a different model now.
Usually, yeah. I mean, it's been a tough thing to figure out, how do we navigate a flat rate for every image, because every image is totally different.
So true.
So I like to take a look at the files, and what people do is I'll sometimes send me a sample of the images. They go, okay, I have 50 images total, and they need retouching. Here's a good sample of them. Here's 5 examples or something.
Right.
And then from there, I go, okay, well, you're looking at X price for this job.
Gotcha.
And so it's usually kind of per project, and I like to get retouching quotes out within 24 hours. And in fact, on our website, there's a spot where if you go to the order form, you can actually upload files.
Okay.
And get a quote. So that kind of starts the process, is that you can go to the order form, and there's an option on there to get a quote, get a retouching quote. And, we'll review the files, take a look at them, and then if we have any other questions, that's our chance to kind of say, hey, what about this? Did you want to cover this too? We noticed this about the files. Did you want to touch that or skip that or whatever? So, that's the process. As far as cost, I mean, it always varies. I mean, on something, retouching, you could end up with something that's maybe just a few bucks per image, or like I've got a couple jobs that I just sent a quote out for yesterday that were around the $45 per image type of range. But
wow, what did they need?
Well, it's really it's for spa, and so the client is a spa, and the photographer did a commercial shoot for them. And so there are things in the background that need to be removed. There is lighting on the wall that needs to be smoothed out and made more uniform. Of course, there's skin smoothing on the couple that's on the massage tables. There's lots and lots of stuff. And this is one way that's really helpful too. Sometimes if you do have a really intense image that needs a lot of retouching, they actually mark it up. So they actually go in and write on the image, in Photoshop or whatever. They'll use some kind of pen tool or something, and they'll highlight areas and, put text on it, and, say we need to pull this out, or need to pull this up, darken this, or whatever. And so it can vary, but I guarantee I'm always looking to make sure that it's a fair price that, covers our costs on time, and is something that you can still work within your budget and deliver to your clients. So
gotcha.
That's my promise.
Cool.
I'm always going to try to get you the best fair price for retouching.
I love that about you.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Well, thanks, Leon. It's such a pleasure working with you, as always. And I've known you for how many years now? So it's been a while. So I have to say, how long has it been? I don't know. 5 years at least?
We met at PartnerCon, which was
my goodness,
convention that Pictage put on.
Yeah,
and Pictage,
right.
of course, is no more.
I think that was 2010 or 2011, the latest. It's probably 2010. So 5 or 6 years.
Sounds good.
Regardless, that started our relationship. I was looking for an outsource solution at the time, and you were a saving grace. So thank you.
My pleasure.
And thank you so much for these invaluable tips. I'm going to put a couple of these into action that I haven't been doing myself. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and please, anybody who's listening to this, feel free to reach out to me. Even if you're not going to be a client of ours, I still love talking about Photoshop and post-production. So if you have any questions on any of that we covered or more, feel free to just reach out to me and shoot me an email. I'd be glad to help.
Well, thanks, Leon.
My pleasure. Anytime.